Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Greg Dearden, conference producer for AI Everything. On behalf of the team and Dubai World Trade Center, welcome to the AI Everything virtual series. As we are unable to meet in person this year, we continue to unite the divided conversations about the most transformative technology of our time. AI adoption in business is non-negotiable. How can your management prepare the organization for artificial intelligence? Today, we have an amazing lineup of internationally recognized experts joining us to address this critical issue. Let's get started. Without further ado, I'd like to hand you over to our host for today, award-winning broadcast journalist, Angie Lau, Editor-in-Chief, Founder and CEO of Forecast News. Over to you, Angie.
And welcome to our friends from around the world. I see that we have attendees from India, Pakistan, France, Italy, the United Kingdom, Asia. Truly a global conversation. It is my pleasure to moderate and be with you for the next hour. This is for you, and as Greg said, one of the most important conversations of our time. Because AI adoption is, as many would undoubtedly say, critical to post-pandemic success. So how do you get your management AI ready? This webinar is part of an exclusive series that will lead up to our main event. AI Everything is going to take place in person March 29th to the 31st, 2021. The event is hosted by DWTC and the National Program for Artificial Intelligence. And so we will, until then, have meaningful conversations just like this one online, and I will see you there next year. But it's a pleasure for me to be here today. So let's jump right to it. While AI has been identified for many as a key disruptor by most industries and companies, widespread adoption is still relatively low. And the question is why? Is it education? Is it learning? Is it a lack of knowledge by executives and senior management? And what are the barriers? And has this changed in this post-COVID world of ours? I'd like to introduce to you right now our esteemed panelists. And we begin with Fatma Bouchsaim. She's head of International Cooperation and Capacity Building, UAE Artificial Intelligence Office. Fatma, welcome. Next, we have Dame Wendy Hall. She's Regis Professor of Computer Science, Associate Vice President, and Executive Director of the Web Science Institute at the University of Southampton. She is also UK's first AI skills champion and member of UK's first AI Council tasked to position the United Kingdom as a leader in the AI sector. Dame Wendy, welcome to you. Next, we have Ryan Royan. He's Group Head of Data Analytics for the Shaloub Group, named one of the most influential people in data by Data IQ and the brains behind best-in-class data analysis and ML strategies at Google, Dyson, and Shaloub Group. Brian, welcome. Next, we have Dr. Eva Marie Müller-Stuhler. She is Practice Leader for Advanced Analytics and AI, member of the Academy of Technology, Global Business Service, IBM Middle East. Dr. Eva Marie, welcome to you. David Toman is our visiting fellow, Kellogg College at the University of Oxford, joining us here today. He leads the delivery of UAE's Artificial Intelligence program on behalf of the University of Oxford and focuses on understanding how historical urban forms can inform future development. David, welcome to you. And then last but not least, we have Dr. Scott Nelson. He's AI lead at PwC Middle East. More than 15 years of working in artificial intelligence, advanced analytics, and data science, publishing more than 20 papers and filing several patents on topics including sentiment and emotion recognition with new approaches to and applications of deep learning and user profiling. So a welcome to all of our panelists right now. It truly is a pleasure. But before I dive into this conversation, let's first get a pulse of our audience. There are hundreds of you joining from around the world. It's truly a pleasure to be with you. So let's pull up our first poll. as we jump to our first issue. And so the question is, and all you need to do is just click onto the answer. How far would you say along is your organization in adopting and implementing AI? Would you say that there are no substantial AI efforts underway right now? Possibly, is it in the planning stage? Is it in the pilot stage? Is it at least embedded in one organization function? Or are you one of those firms where you're already seeing full implementation within your organization? As you think about your answers right there, I want to also do some housekeeping. And really, this conversation is for our audience. Yes, there are hundreds of you, but we will integrate your questions as much as possible. And so all you need to do is pull up and type in your questions in the Q&A tab, and I'll do my best to include them in this webinar over the next hour. So without further ado, let's get started. All right, panelists, let's talk about the role of AI in corporates. You know, businesses, especially big ones, change is often difficult, and certainly not understanding why the need for change is certainly a huge barrier to change. A recent survey by PwC found that the number of bosses planning to deploy AI across their firm was at 4% in 2020. That is down from 20% from the year before. So I guess my first question to the whole group is, how much do you think this has changed post-COVID? And do you think that education and learning and knowledge is critical to educating management and not just the technical departments when it comes to deploying AI? And Scott, I'd like to start with you.
Thank you, Angie, and good afternoon, everybody. I think we really don't know what COVID will do to this landscape. I think it's still too soon to talk about AI specifically, but as PwC, I know we survey CFOs on a frequent basis to get a sense of the market during this global crisis. And we see broadly, digital transformation is still very much on the agenda. We're only looking at globally 16% of CFOs looking to postpone or defer projects in this space. And actually in the Middle East, that's as low as 6%. So I think things still remain very positive and optimistic about the adoption of technology broadly going forward. But that education piece has always been critical. And it's something I've been talking about in the 15, 18 months that I've been here in the region out of Dubai, is that understanding, because there is so much hype about AI, we talk about AI so much, that understanding is key at all levels, particularly with the decision makers. So for example, you need to be able to make informed decisions, realistic decisions about AI when you're buying it, to know what it does and what it doesn't do. Similarly, you need to be able to ask the right questions and trust the answers you get, either of your teams or of any potential vendor. We're in a situation right now where skills are a little immature and in high demand, so a lot of people won't have in-house teams. They won't have the ability to get that yet. So you'll be looking to third-party vendors for existing cognitive services or consultancy firms who can come in and support that. So I need you to be able to ask the right questions so that you can trust me when I give you the answers. So it really is vital.
I mean, that's easy to say, hard to do. How do I ask the right questions if I'm either intimidated or I don't have that breadth of skill? I'm not an engineer, I'm a CEO. And so Fatma, you know, your role is almost critical, as almost serving as a translator of sorts. I mean, is this what corporates and CEOs and senior executives kind of need to seek out when they're trying to figure out how to educate themselves?
Absolutely, Angie. And thank you, Scott, for your input. When it comes to deploying AI, I mean, everyone wants to deploy AI. Everyone talks AI and what the impact economically and from a financial perspective is, but no one understands really I won't say no one, but the most don't understand how it works. What are the implications? Will it replace employees? Will it not? What are the social effects? What is the data privacy issues that will arise? What are the security issues that will come about? And the language we speak to programmers and tech-savvy people is very different than the language we use with C-suite management and above. And at the AI office, we've worked so much on programs alongside the University of Oxford in training government officials when it comes to AI. What are the implications? What are the effects? And so on and so forth. But it's very important that leadership understands not only the bigger picture of AI, but also the nitty-gritty of AI in order for them to make informed decisions, as Scott mentioned.
What do you mean by nitty-gritty?
So it's important to understand that there is data required for AI training, for example. Are you going to buy your AI from a vendor, or are you going to develop it internally? What are the pros and cons of each when it comes to these two approaches? What is the data issues that will arise in terms of data privacy? Are you giving out specific data that is related to your customers, to your employees, so on and so forth? These are questions that usually top leadership don't think about. For them, it's only a matter of, let's deploy this technology in order for me to save up XYZ of revenue, for example, or make that much money. So it's very important for them to understand more about AI. And it's not just the outer layer of artificial intelligence and the implications, but rather than more deeper levels, if that makes sense.
I'd like to bring in Dame Wendy here, because this is really an issue at the core and the crux of what you do. What are the questions that senior executives and CEOs must ask themselves beyond even just the technical as they assess AI within their corporations? To follow up on what Fatma suggested.
Yes, thank you, Angie. And I'll say good morning to everybody because it's breakfast time here in the UK. I want to just, to answer that, I want to just pick up on what Scott said. I think COVID is going to change things far more than we realise at the moment. In the UK, most companies are in survival mode, to be honest. And yes, they're talking about innovation, and the government are talking about innovation around the digital and AI to get us out of the economic crisis, but we're nowhere near really being able to apply that. Interestingly, compared to when the companies like Scott's company were doing all the analysis on numbers of job losses we might have, analysis has been happening for the last few years. COVID has cut far more jobs than any AI at the moment. And how we maneuver out of this is going to be really, really interesting because we're still in the middle of it. And I think that the other thing that really worried the C-suite were the legal and ethical issues of introducing AI. And we can't AI from the data that it's used to train it. And so I think the assurance is that if they do something with AI, that they're not going to get sued as a result or make a mistake on behalf of the company. I think for the C-suite, that's really, really, really important. So of course, education is a big part of this. And I like Fatima saying they need to know the nitty-gritty. They need to, I've never known a CEO that has to know the nitty-gritty of absolutely everything. I think they need a trusted board. And I think the sort of discussions about the ethics and legal issues have to happen at board level. And I really, really believe, and we can come back to this, that discussion has to take place amongst a diverse group of people, not just with the technical people. Right? At the board level, the advice they have to have must be very diverse in terms of legal, ethics, economic, obviously the whole business model for the company. So I can say more later, but we are in very strange times. And I'm not sure AI is going to get us out of these strange times quite yet.
They aren't, but you know what? There's one thing to be sure, that technology tools in our hands can certainly assist. And so it's that kind of thinking, and you're certainly right, Dame Wendy, you know, we're all experiencing a global event. And so, you know, really digesting what it means to not only the C-suite, but honestly, you know, what does it mean to your colleagues, your peers, and your customers as well? And so how do you, as an executive in the C-suite, make sure, as you said, identify and are as well versed in the diversity of experiences and conversations from the top all the way down to your consumer? And you must be at least well skilled in that. We have a question from the audience, and the question is this, and I think I'd like to direct it to Ryan from the Shalhoub group here, because you're really already in corporate. You're part of an internal team that is already making great headways in AI integration within your corporate. But so this is probably your experience. And the question is this: what approach can be taken if company executives are unwilling or unable to understand the benefits of AI? So come on, Ryan, share some personal anecdotes with us and how you overcame those obstacles.
I think, you know, first and foremost, you know, to David's point as well, I think it's important to have a measure of humility, because there has been an incredible amount of hype and excitement, you know, when it comes to this subject over the last couple of years. And so I can understand very well, you know, if, you know, certain executives have almost become a little bit jaded. You know, they've maybe gone to conference after conference where they've seen fantastic presentations, but, you know, a bit to Dame Wendy's point, you know, practically, you know, have we seen, you know, fundamental shifts? You know, do we think that, that AI is going to get us out of this crisis? You know, not quite. So I think it's more about being very, very specific in articulating both what the benefits can be in an incredibly concrete sense, and then also articulating what that journey looks like. So, I mean, I'm not sure what business the person is who raised this question, but a little bit of a contrived example. You know, everyone can agree that, especially in a crisis like this, it's good to have data. For example, you know, if you don't have data on who your customers are, you know, it becomes very difficult to understand how to, you know, prioritize maybe certain initiatives. It becomes very difficult maybe to kind of connect with customers in a meaningful way. So data, everyone can agree that fundamental layer is important. But of course, you can go up the value chain, right? And you can get to kind of the analytics, and you can start to say, okay, well, let's actually analyze, you know, what type of customer segments do we have? You know, what are the difference in behaviors between one type of customer and another type of customer? That's already more valuable. And most executives will recognize that. I think the extra step that needs to be taken is to say, well, we can actually go beyond that, right? From this kind of analytics to, you know, these deployed ML models, right? Which is the most frequently adopted form of AI. I mean, I don't think many people are hard coding decision trees nowadays. And to say, you know, imagine if you could take this analytics and really embed it in the organization in a way that it's automated, right? So, you know, you're not just understanding, you know, what the difference is between a high value and a low value customer, but you can start to create interfaces that respond dynamically depending on the nature of the customer. And I think when it's expressed in certain very practical ways like that, it becomes much more easy for executives to understand, okay, you know, this is the additional investment that's required, but also then this is the benefit that I can inspect. And I really liked the point that Fatma made, which is, you know, people need to have some understanding of the gritty details, because, you know, if executives think that they can, you know, just throw some money at a problem and without the right degree of data quality or data governance or infrastructure capability, you know, have a wonderfully, you know, wonderfully presented AI ecosystem, they're going to be in for an unpleasant surprise.
Yeah, I guess the question as well really reflects the concern that, you know, in one camp, you absolutely understand the AI benefits as it's integrated and what benefits that a corporate can glean. And then on the other hand, an executive who is completely either, you know, unable and or unwilling, you know, there's a disconnect. And so a question, I'll ask Dr. Eva Marie to follow up here. I mean, you know, at IBM, this is kind of your role where you have to not only, you're sharing technology, but you have to share what the value proposition is. How do you sometimes get over these obstacles and bridge these conversations for C-suites who, you know, may not necessarily get it until they get it? And then how did you do that?
I actually have to defend the executives a little bit at this point because I did see even 10 years ago, a lot of the decisions from executives were data driven. So you wouldn't buy a company, an M&A process was always data driven. Large ROI processes, we modeling offshore wind parks, restructuring processes, we always did on data-driven decision, on large financial models, where we would forecast not just the P&L effect, but also cash flow and balance sheet. And that mindset, somehow then from the other side came AI, and it was something in the IT department. And it was weird because it should have been the other side, the strategic side, developing further into that field, and not coming from the other side. And what companies then did was hiring smart kids from university and putting them into IT departments and expecting them to change the company. And that has been shown is a recipe for failure. But what really works is coming from the business problem and saying, if you would know your company better, if you would know the future better, if you can move from your forecasting model to actually a better forecasting model using data science and using more advanced techniques, that is where the question comes from. And then that's where we see massive impact. And I do agree also that we have globally a big data issue, especially when it comes to the crisis. We have a big issue when it comes to data about COVID, medical data and so on, because you don't have a unified data governance, you don't have unified collections. So one hospital in that town measures completely different to the next hospital. That means also for corporates, look at what you can change in your universe and make a plan. So I'm, people who know me, I'm a firm believer that in opportunity lies, in crisis lies opportunities. And as a corporate, and we see more and more of our customers now picking up on it and saying, okay, how do we actually get out of this stronger and better? How do we use that moment that we have to actually pick up on business? And I think from the business perspective, if you really think about where can AI help? And not just AI, data science, all of that, efficient use, where you can say, okay, let's optimize our operations. How can we minimize risk? How can we forecast certain events? How can we make our workplace safe? And prepare for what is coming in the future. And that is what is really important at the moment. In car racing, we say you win in the turns. And I think that is the opportunity. And we actually see our customers picking up on that. We see businesses preparing for the future now and saying, okay, no, it's not the time to slack off. It's actually prepare for the next run. And
I love your
sorry,
I love your metaphor of speeding into the turns, and that's exactly how you make those hairpin turns very safely. A question from the audience, and this is for you, David. I want to bring you in here as we wrap up this first theme on educating our executives. Mohammed Nasser asks, I think there's a public image related to AI. In the back of public minds, AI is mistakenly more associated to job losses than it truly is. How can we change that perspective? You know, David, you're leading the delivery of UAE's artificial intelligence program on behalf of the University of Oxford. How do you almost do this kind of PR role, not only for consumers and the public, but also critically within corporates?
I actually don't think it is PR. I think it goes to the roots of what AI actually is. First, I don't think people actually really understand what AI is. I think there's a great sort of confusion out there, both from the point of view of chief executives, executives to an organization, and the general public. It is a buzzword that's been pinging around for north of nearly 100 years now, and actually breaking through that is pretty critical. Going back to the points that people have made, I think in these post during COVID times, the bandwidth of our executive teams and our businesses are maxed out doing other things. And I think people will then try to respond to AI by simply steaming in, handing it over to the technical folks and say, deliver something, give us something. And that pushes us down a track where that causes even more concern with the public because it's frankly out of control. I think that's what we got to face up with. That's what we got to deal with.
And David, you believe that you have to educate both management and technical teams together. I mean, they have to have the same common goals. They might not necessarily speak the same language, but they have to have a shared commonality. How do you make sure that you nurture that in your own corporate for the CEOs out there and senior executives who are thinking about, okay, how do we ensure that we have a more dynamic conversation when it comes to AI integration?
Well, fortunately, Oxford is the antithesis of any corporate. We just do things in a very, very different way. I think it's the joys of longevity there. But I think you've hit the nail on the head there, if I can say, Angie, that it is one of translation. You have chief executives very concerned about their bottom line and also the ethics of what they do. You know, there's increasingly concern from the top floor of the organization of how they will be perceived as a business going forward. And yet what we've seen and what I've seen in the last 2 or 3 years working in the UAE is the ability, and if you have the drive to bring those two factions, those two different groups together and actually try to bridge that gap. So what we've done with our friends in the UAE is to bring together the executives and the technical teams and discuss ethics and discuss and so on one side ask the technical folks to understand ethics, and on the other side ask the executives to understand how to program, to get an insight into each other's world and to start to bridge that language gap.
That I'd love to be a fly on that wall. Let's touch base with our audience once again here and do another interactive poll for everybody. So you guys ready for this? Here it is. I think my senior management have a good understanding of AI. Do you agree or do you disagree? And this is really a nice setup question for our next chunk of conversation, where we really wonder how to bridge the gap between executives and data scientists. So let's see what the results are. Okay, so disagree, 61%. So unlike Dr. Eva Marie, who's defending her senior executives and her C-suiters, there are a lot of people out in our audience who feel that senior management have a ways to go. And so really, I'd like to kick things off by sharing a survey carried out by Boston Consulting Group and MIT, polling 2,500 bosses, and found that 7 out of 10, 70%, said that their AI projects had generated little impact so far. And so my question is there a disconnect? 2/5 of those who were surveyed said with significant investments in AI had yet to report any benefits at all. Is there a disconnect here? You know, are the values not being delivered? Is there an over expectation? Is the outcome not being managed well? And then if so, how do you bridge the gap between executives and data scientists? And so I'd like to kick things off with Ryan here. Again, you know, you're part of the private sector. You're using the technology in the Shaloub group. How do you, as an executive, bridge the gap in your own firm in the role that you play?
So I think part of the challenge is that, you know, the expectations for many of these programs aren't really well defined up front. And I think you can see a kind of like analog to a few years ago when everybody wanted to do big data, right? So every organization went out there and started building data lakes, right? And even executives who didn't have any idea what Hadoop was, right? They were like, we want a Hadoop, we must have it now, and we'll have a data lake. And lo and behold, if you spend millions, or in some organizations' cases, tens of millions of dollars, bringing all your data together, without a clear plan on how to drive value from it, you're going to end up with a bunch of data that grows stale. And then, of course, executives started making jokes about the dreaded data swamp, right? Nobody wants to go near it because it's a bit of a painful reminder of a bad investment. And I think I've heard a similar term when it comes to AI, where people talk about pilot purgatory. People are so busy getting excited about all the potential applications of AI, whether it's around image recognition, or it's NLP, or it's speech synthesis, or it's classification, customer segmentation, and whatnot. But because they aren't embedding those initiatives in terms of a broader strategy, right? They're not framing them as part of a more kind of focused journey with concerted stage of investment. They end up going nowhere. And I think this is really the key thing, and for us as well as a group is being explicit and saying, look, this is where we want to be in, let's say, 2025, and this is how we're going to get there. Because to be frank, anyone pretty much can start getting valuable usage out of AI if they have some relatively robust transaction data or customer data, right? You can immediately start applying things like random forests, right? Clustering. There's a whole bunch of stuff you can do. But if you want to start, for example, creating really dynamic, interactive customer experiences, you're going to need a much broader array of data, and you're also going to have a much kind of more representative kind of a pool of data, especially when you're in a part of the world like this that's so incredibly diverse, right? Catering to people from almost every nation under the sun. And so I think, being very clear as to where you want to go, what those different stages look like, and what success and then the kind of required investment looks like for each of those different stages, I think will go some way to closing that gap.
Thank you, Ryan.
Angie,
yeah, go ahead.
Angie, just let me dive in there kind of for a second. I think just to pick up on Ryan's point, I think before you spend a dime on artificial intelligence, there's one key starting point, and that is to understand your business. What Ryan is articulating is, corporate saying the latest technology, data lakes, artificial intelligence, whatever it happens to be, spend the money. That's a fundamental lack of understanding of what your business parameters are. We have two colleagues on this call from IBM and PwC. You're experts at trying to unbundle your business. Once you understand it, understand what your business problem is, then look at the solution. And frankly, it may not be AI. It may be something completely different. But be open to that before you start diving into the AI lake, Ryan.
That's a great point. That's a great point that David, you brought up. Thanks for that, because it just kind of reminds people that there is no magical there's no magical solution or cure. Unfortunately, in this day and age, we wish there was. But it is critical to understanding the business. And so part of that understanding is, let's say you do know your business. And so for, the IBM, PwC, our panelists here, Dr. Scott, I'm going to ask you this, how much translating do you actually have to do? You're in a role where you have to help them understand, or achieve the goal that they've set out, but then also understand some part of this technology. How do you do that?
Well, I think it's exactly to build on Ryan and David's point. Excuse me. AI is a solution looking for a problem. And within PwC, we have the luxury that we are able to go all the way from a company's strategy through to execution and help them at every stage in that journey. And honestly, I think my boss would rather I spent more time selling AI, but I end up selling a lot of not AI because that's not the solution you need. It is that evolution of digital transformation, data transformation, AI transformation, getting your strategy ducks in a line. And so to your original question, that can take a lot of investment before you see a return. But that translator role, and it very much isn't, and Fatma touched on it earlier on, the AI translator is a cool, trendy role. It's cooler than data scientists. Those guys are old hat now. We're all AI translators because we're multilingual. We can speak to the business and we can speak to the technical folks. And it's very much where I find my role. And I'll give you an example. So we were looking at a multilingual email automation solution. It's just an application of NLP to determine, can we automatically respond to this email? Now, the data science team just wants to go ahead and solve the problem. So we want to target as many automation possibilities as possible, because we think that's probably where the saving is, right? And if we get some wrong, that's fine. We just don't want to miss any. We want to maximize how many we do over here. Working with the business owners and stakeholders, they had the complete opposite perspective, because those errors that we're so keen to, we'll maximize the savings, they're like, yeah, but that is an incorrect error that you've sent to a customer. So you've emailed them incorrectly. So there's experience on that side of things. So actually, we would rather you sway on the errors on this side. Better to miss saving 10 cents than potentially risk that experience. And so AI for me is, I prefer to work really closely at the kickoff project with our experience team, our ethnographers, our service designers, and having that user, be it the end customer or the business owner, they are at the heart of the problem. And as David said, we need to expand from that, figure out where our AI is the solution, and then we can start bringing in the technical teams. You know, is it an automation problem that could be just RPA? Is it a data visualization problem? But that translation role and knowing the ins and outs and being able to talk to them is really important.
Fatma, that sounds like your role. Am I wrong? I mean, you as I know, you have this is part of your DNA. Not only are you extraordinarily versed in technology and AI, you also come from a communications background. And so how do you serve this role and this skill set?
So to put things in context, I work at the UAE AI office, and we are mandated to deliver the national strategy for artificial intelligence of 2031. A big part of that strategy is both deployment of artificial intelligence and capacity building. And when we say capacity building, we emphasize on upskilling and reskilling government officials and individuals in society. When we looked at the deployment part, and I go back to the previous point I mentioned when I meant nitty-gritty, it's not, we don't have to mention like the coding language or the programming language or what is the code used for a specific solution, but leadership needs to understand what are the different implications of adopting an artificial intelligence solution. And as Scott said, in order to have a solution, we must have a problem. And a lot of times the leadership might not see it as a problem because it's business as usual. So in my role, I must identify these opportunities and the challenges and translate it to top leadership. The language we use is very important in that, and that's where the communication comes in place. I work with different universities and academic institutes to provide these knowledge sessions and educational sessions. And again, as I mentioned, it's very important to change the mindset. And we know that AI might not take over at this point in time, but we can always have AI as a core in an organization. An AI-empowered human, for example, where an individual or an employee is still operating and functioning, but his role is enhanced through AI, and that way his efficiency is increased. And this is just one example of how we are changing the mindset of leadership, where you don't have to displace your employee or fire them or let go of them. In contrary, we still need human interaction when it comes to AI. People are not that comfortable being exposed to artificial intelligence. You can see that through chatbots and these automated virtual assistants where you start talking to this auto teller, and then you automatically choose press 0 for operator, and everyone goes to the operator because they're still not that comfortable, or there is no trust that this operator or chatbot will give them the right answer. And this is where we try to change the mindset to a more AI empowered human services, if that makes sense.
That makes sense. That makes sense. Fatma, thank you so much. I want to bring in a question from the audience here. And this question is for you, Dame Wendy. Our question from the audience is this: can AI be used to set exam papers at school and college levels based on the industry pulse versus pure theory questions? And would this be useful to bridge the gap of skill requirements?
No.
Yeah.
The answers are no and no. Sorry.
The answer is no and no. And so what would be the yes and yes for you?
So we're a long way off from AI setting exam questions. In fact, universities, I remember in the 80s when we had a computer program that marked computer programs. It was pretty primitive, but we haven't moved much past that then. I think that if you, I don't quite understand the link between the two questions, because there's a lot of different ways universities could use AI, and not in terms of setting exam questions.
I guess I'm just gonna, and I asked it because I thought it was more relevant to AI and education in schools, in post-secondary and universities. Is there a gap there, Dame Wendy? How are you bridging that?
How are you bridging that
gap?
How are you making that link?
I'm gonna riff off the question. I'm gonna ask a completely separate question.
There was a link to schools. There was a link to. I want to answer another question actually, but
okay.
there are a link to schools which I didn't quite get from the question. What were you trying to make the link there then?
So let's talk about lack of.
So can I answer another question, which is because other people have been talking about the introduction to AI into industry, and I think the really important thing, others have mentioned this a bit, is it's not a one size fits all. And university is a type of industry, if you want to think of it like that. Universities and schools are places that can think about adopting AI, but not necessarily in the way that the question answers. But I think it isn't a one size fits all. And I like to look at what's happening in terms of a bit of history as well. And just imagine this pandemic without an internet. Right? Now, 30 years ago, we didn't have an internet. And I remember going around talking to companies saying, you really got to think about this thing called the World Wide Web. You really need to think about how your business is going to use the internet. And many companies at the time, many C-suite people said, over my dead body, will my company set up a website? I can remember them saying it to us. Absolutely, because they didn't understand what it was going to do for their business. Come 30 years forward, we would have been in a very different place in the world on many different levels if we hadn't had the internet. This, for example, is only running because of the internet. And the way we've handled this pandemic has been patchy, to say the least. And I'm not just talking about the medical side of it. I'm talking about how we've tried to keep industry going throughout a pandemic. And I think there are many ways in which AI could have helped that, including for universities and schools. But we aren't there yet. Now, you jump 30 years forward, and people will look back at this time and say, look at how they're so bad handling. We can do it so much better because AI is running our retail chains. It's telling us where the goods are. It's telling us where we get our energy. It's telling us, so I think we have to, what we should talk to the executives about is thinking about setting this in the context of a transition to a more and more intelligent type of framework in which they can run their businesses. And I want to say one other thing, which is the lesson we learned from the internet was companies moved when they saw other companies move, right? They tend to move in packs, and one industry sector is not independent of another. And especially when it comes to AI, sometimes you can't move until either your peers have moved or your colleagues in another sector have moved, because it's all interconnected. And that was how it was with the internet as well. You as one single company putting your company on the website didn't get you anywhere, because that's not the point of the. And I think there are things you can do internally, of course, one company can do with AI. But there are things that you can only do if other companies like you or part of your retail supply chain are moving with AI. And you've got to talk about those scenarios as well. And they tend to, I think that the C-suite learn from their peers as much as from anybody outside telling them about it.
And that, you talk about the evolution of best practices, and it's hard when, we're still at the pioneer phase of it. And so and thanks, Dame Wendy, for that. And entertaining that first question. Dr. Eva Marie, I'd like to bring you in here with this question from the audience. What is the one key factor hindering top management, in your view, from having a realistic expectation from AI?
I think, a difficult question. I think there are two factors. I think one of them is a little bit the fear of looking stupid. The lack of knowing how important the strategy is, because you wouldn't run your marketing department without a strategy. You wouldn't run your sales without a strategy, but somehow people expected results from their from the data science departments without having a clear data strategy. And that is, my whole life, and even before I joined IBM and I was working for one of the big fours, we were always in management consulting and never in IT, because that's where the question has to come from. That's where the drive has to come from. And data science has to be an enabler. And I think the senior executive have to maybe get the confidence of saying, this is my business, I know my business. And I see AI not as the miracle thing that solves, but I see it as something that I call for and I bring in. So I say, I want to optimize my drilling in oil and gas. I want to, even for government, I want to understand my immigration policies and the impact of that. And from that, and from knowing where you're coming from, then you can say, okay, now I bring in the right people to solve these problems. And to actually be successful in AI, and as we say, AI at scale, it has a lot of different topics. And I think that education is really essential to have. So you have to have the strategy, you have to have an operating model. How do I run with my teams? How do I build agile teams and garages? Do I have the data? How do I secure the data? How do I get a good data governance and data ops model? And how do I manage the change in my company and educate not just the data scientists, but everyone around it? Because in a way, I think we're moving to a state where everybody is a data scientist. The CEO is a data scientist. The person in the marketing data department is a data scientist. Data scientist has become such a broad term by now. I think everybody can ask themselves, what am I doing in my daily operations? And how do I make it better? How do I get to work faster by using Google Maps? And that's the same thing you have to do in business.
That's a great point. We are all data scientists. We integrate so much data and assess in real time. We skew strategies based on what real-time information is, and you don't have to be a data scientist or even a marketing person. These are skills that are critical to every person within every corporation. And Dr. Eva Marie, you actually have provided a brilliant segue to our final theme as we round third here, headed for home. What is integral to operational structures and models as we think about AI integration? So our last one of our last polls to kind of whet the appetite a little bit from our audience. Want to ask you directly, senior management understanding or lack of is the biggest barrier to successful AI adoption. Do you agree? Do you disagree? Are you sure? And I'll let you think about that as we set up what our final theme is, which is how do business leaders align organization structure and figure out ways of working in order to build an AI-powered operation. So let's see what the results of our poll is. You agree. You agree that right now it is the understanding or lack thereof, which is the biggest barrier to successful AI adoption. So let's talk about that. So, okay, we're the problem, right? We're those of us who are sitting in the C-suites, those of us who are the senior executives and professionals, or looking up to the C-suite and going, oh my gosh, do these guys or do these men or women, know how they're going to lead us into the next generation of how we work around here? So if you're one of these business leaders and you recognize that you're the bottleneck, how do you change? How do you align your organizational structure? How do you think about any of those things? Fatma, I want to start with you here, because you're in a role where, you are trying to make sure that this is a more seamless conversation than what a lot of other people are experiencing right now.
Well, one of the things we've done, and my colleague David here can jump in at any time, we've organized a program called the Artificial Intelligence Program with University of Oxford. And in our first year experience, which was 2 years ago, we had 94 government officials. The content was preset by us and the university. We've shared our expectations, what are the topics we wanted to touch upon. And when the program finished 8 months later, we realized that many of the participants were either senior executives, like the discussion we're having today, and the rest were very, very technical. They are the actual software engineers. And part of the program is their capstone projects where they come together and identify a problem and come up with a solution. And that's the only time where executives and senior executives and the programmers came on the same table and discussed a certain issue. And it was very interesting to see the different ways of their thoughts and how each one approached their challenges and came up with solutions. So for the second cohort, which we've just recently wrapped up, we've broken the program into 2 streams, one of which is a general introductory stream for the executives, and one for the very advanced technical employees. But 60 or 70% of the program is overlapped when it comes to the ethical, security, data privacy topics. So they do merge when it comes to that. And for us, again, it's a learning curve for us as well, and we're learning as we go. But this is one way where we're bridging the gap between the doers and the decision makers, if that makes sense. We're very lucky in the UAE to have a leadership that really believes in artificial intelligence, and they're the ones nominating their employees to come into our program. But we also see many companies where they do believe in artificial intelligence, but don't really understand how it works, what needs to be done. And that's where we're currently working on different programs, not necessarily training programs, but more of an awareness campaign kind of thing, where we're raising awareness for these senior executives and trying to bridge the gap, to be honest.
David, you work with Fatma on this project. What are the weaknesses that you still think that need to be addressed in corporate?
I think I spent 30 odd years in the oil industry at sort of a very senior level. And one thing I found with chief executives and chief financial officers, they all hate looking like idiots. And that's a common thread over my entire career. I think one of the things is to, I think one of the other speakers, maybe it was Dame Wendy, mentioned about people getting together, those executives getting together and understanding what AI actually means. But also think in terms of that executive level is to give them the educational skills to be able to ask the right question, whether that's at Southampton or Oxford or any other university, so they can ask the right questions. And what we found working with the UAE Artificial Intelligence Office and Ministry is to equip people with the tools to ask the right question. So when someone comes in with a great pitch, this is what AI is, we've got this fantastic AI solution. And instead of doing what, Ryan has described as this kind of panic into, we must do something AI, we must do it, is asking the right questions. What does it do? Is it artificial intelligence? Is AI the right solution for us? And I think bridging those, almost being able to ask that procurement question is some of the outputs we've had. And then lastly, just the last point, is the capstone projects that Fatma described is then actually not just doing education for education's sake, but then bringing it into the real world and actually testing out some of those potential strategies for delivering artificial intelligence for real, with the experts around you in an environment where you don't look like an idiot. You're learning with everyone else. I think that's proved to be very powerful over the last couple of years.
Angie, could I say something?
Yes, absolutely, Dame Wendy. Please go ahead.
I think we haven't got much time, but I think it's also important to talk about educating the C-suite. I think it has to be part of their DNA, part of their board discussion. I've been on several boards where the move to technology is not really discussed at board level. The CTO might be there to talk about things, but actually most of the directors, lawyers and accountants, and they talk about what pleases the shareholders, and that's got to be the next month's profits, and we've really got, I think we have to get this discussion at board level. I could say more, but in the interest of time, I'll stop there.
Yeah, I wish we could dive more into that. It's absolutely a critical point, Dame Wendy, that you've brought up. We've got 3 minutes left. It's the question of the responsibility of not only understanding the technology, but the implications and the impact of that technology. So really, I'm going to ask each of you 10 seconds. One view on AI for 2021. Where do you see AI integration in 2021? Start with Ryan, and then I'll just call you out. I'll cut you off and I'll call you out. Okay, Ryan, go.
No pressure. I think 2021 is the year where it's, what's a Tom Cruise movie, show me the money, and I think, more than ever now, it's important that when companies invest in new technologies like AI, they're going to see a very clear, tangible benefit. Doesn't mean millions of dollars, week after week, but there has to be a very clear demonstration of value being created, or people are going to lose faith.
Dr. Eva Marie, 10 seconds. Where do you see AI?
I think we'll get into an impact-driven AI. The question of why are we doing it? What is our strategy? And how do we ensure that it's successful, integrated with the business? And really focusing on optimizing operations, minimizing risk, all of that. And not so much the big innovation bets that have nothing to do with the business purpose.
Dame Wendy.
I would say take your time. No knee-jerk reactions. COVID might accelerate the use of AI in some industries and slow it down in others. And just take your time.
Thank you. Fatma?
I think in 2020, we will see a lot of AI adoption. And as Dr. Eva Marie said, in core business rather than the fluff of big innovations.
Dr. Scott?
I think we'll see a balance between what Ryan was saying, what Dame Wendy was saying, that people who've already started thinking in that strategy, who've already started taking their time, will see those rewards starting to come in. Others may not hit them yet, but as they switch that mindset to the right one of taking your time, thinking it through, and getting it right.
And how do you think we need to get this right, David, in 2021? Your forecast for AI?
I think that people need to just look at in your headlong rush towards the technology of artificial intelligence, you need to remember the ethics and the legal side. If you don't think about ethics and the legal side, it will stop you dead in your tracks. So you need to get into that as well.
And you probably also need to join more webinars like this, audience, to really gain more understanding, more insight. And, I really want to thank everyone who's joined us for this incredible conversation. But of course, my greatest thanks goes to the panelists who have joined us here today. One final poll for our audience, and this is truly for you as we lead up to physically meeting each other in person when we are all healthier and when we are all better. Which AI specific themes are of interest to you for our next webinar? And please go ahead and share your areas of interest there. And of course, COVID has changed our world. There is no doubt about that. It has also meant that we are thinking in new ways, and we need to address our businesses in new ways. And so I want to thank everyone for being as patient as you have been in anticipating this upcoming conference, which will be, by the way, March 29th to the 31st, 2021, of course, hosted by Dubai World Trade Center and the National Program for Artificial Intelligence. And I will be your host for that event. And I'm truly honored to be the host of this event. Again, thank you to our panelists. Thank you to everyone. And we will all see each other in person in March. Until then, I'm Angie Lau. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.